cosmic consciousness, extraterrestrials and UFOs, sacred geometry, ancient civilizations, spiritual connection, the quantum universe. All of these topics and so much more with your host, Sev Tuck, on Alien Spirit with Sev.
Hello, I'm Sev, and welcome to Alien Spirit. I have a very special guest today. I've known her for a couple of years, Paige. Katie has personal ties to a high strangeness ranch in Colorado, now known as the Rocky Mountain Ranch. In UFO folklore, it was known as the Clearview Ranch, and it predates the infamous Skinwalker Ranch by over a decade. This motivated her interest in ufology to find answers to her experiences and to uncover the truth about what was happening there. She is now CEO of Rocky Mountain Ranch Research and is a co-host on the UAP Studies podcast. Katie can be seen on History Channel's Beyond Skinwalker, and I watched both episodes and I loved it, and I got goosebumps, and we're going to talk about why. Travel Channel's UFO Witness, Gaia's Beyond Belief with George Noory, Small Town Monsters, On the Trail of UFOs Night Visitors, and their new series, UFOs Revisited, as well as Ron James' film, Accidental Truth. Katie conducts independent investigations and research through her Rocky Mountain Ranch Research Foundation. She has been a presenter at several conferences and has appeared on many radio shows and podcasts, including Coast to Coast with George Knapp and Spaced Out Radio. Katie is the author of Letters of Love and Light, 4 decades of UFO encounters, experiences, and sightings shared with ufologist R. Leo Sprinkle. She is writing her second book, The Rocky Mountain Ranch, Crafts, Cattle, Cryptids, and Cover-Ups. Katie holds a Bachelor of Science in Visual Communication. Welcome, Katie Paige.
Thanks for having me, Sev. It's so great to be here. It's great to be here. That second book, I feel like it's never going to get finished. But I know that you and I have this in common where we believe in everything happening for its reason in due time, synchronicities and all that. And I feel like I started working on that book years ago, and then Beyond Skinwalker came about. And now I have all these new experiences that. So it's been on this back burner for years and years. I feel like I keep like another year's gone by.
No, I feel the same way because I've been meaning to write my second book for several years now. And I keep changing my mind. The longer I wait, the more I keep changing my mind about what I'm going to write about. All right, Katie, let's start from when you were a little girl.
Oh,
yeah. I think that's a good place to start. Yeah. So where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Illinois, actually. So this is kind of cool because I typically don't start that far back. But what's interesting, as families do around Thanksgiving and holidays, you have these kind of things, these stories or things you talk about. And through the years, I heard about my grandfather, actually my dad's father, having a sighting in Wisconsin because they lived in Wisconsin over Lake Como of a oblong-shaped craft. And it was actually investigated by J. Allen Hynek. So small world there. And then we had traveled from Illinois back to Wisconsin quite often to see my grandparents. And we were crossing the border from Wisconsin into Illinois in a town called Richmond, which is sort of close to the border there. And we also had a close encounter with an oblong shaped craft. And my mom pulls the car over. She said it was about the size of a billboard. So, rather small, which kind of reminds me of these Tic Tac sightings, perhaps. But she said I was pretty small at that time, under the age of 2. And she said, once we got back on the road, the lines in the middle of the road, she said I was like catatonic. Like I was just like hypnotized after that. And they were like, Katie, come out of it. And so that was sort of the first kind of experience. And then you fast forward, we moved to Colorado in 1970. had some traumatic events with a half brother who, you know, it was an arsonist and things like that, but we don't need to get into that yet unless we talk about the trauma connection, because I think there's a trauma connection to some of this, or at the very least, out of body experiences, people who can astral travel and what I think they tie into something. We could talk about that here in a while. So I had that going on. But and then, in 1975, my mom started dating a gentleman. She was a key punch operator for United Airlines at their training center in the tech center in Colorado. That's why we moved from Illinois to Colorado. And she met a gentleman who had this ranch in Colorado. And this was the time Linda Moulton Howe was out there. She was an investigative journalist at the time. We had hundreds of mutilations going on. So that's where Linda got her start, kind of out there in Elbert County. This went on for 3 years, from the height of it, should I say, 75, 76, 77 into 78. And even though my sister and I and my mom didn't live on this ranch property full time, the people that my mom's boyfriend at the time had 3 sons. The 2 younger sons lived with us during the week to attend a bigger school district, which was the Cherry Creek School District, instead of the small little country school, And so we would travel back and forth to the ranch and sometimes spend weekend days out there. And every time we went out there, really unusual things were happening. And on top of that, we always heard the adults talking because, I'm 9, 10, 11 years old at this time. And we heard the adults, talking about police being called and cattle mutilations happening and other strange things. And fast forward all these years later, after, get married, raise a family, these questions kind of never leave you. Like, what was all that I was experiencing? And that's why I'm here today. Like so many of us, we start out just wanting to answer our own questions to our own experiences.
There you are as a little girl, such a pretty little girl, still pretty. So these are all the things that you were going through as a little girl.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is, like so many of us, I compartmentalized a lot of these different experiences I was having, because even though I experienced things physically at the Rocky Mountain Ranch, our house was 45 minutes away from the ranch property. And at that house, I was experiencing these tall shadow figures next to my bed. I always slept with Big Sister. I was always afraid, checking the closet, checking under the bed, move the bed up against the wall. Always had to sleep with Big Sister to protect me. I always felt a sense of being watched. So much so, like walking back and forth to elementary school, motorcycles were particularly terrifying to me because they could travel up on the grass. I was so afraid all the time of being taken that if a car drove by, I would walk up to the nearest house as if I lived there, and I pretended to live there. And that went on for decades with me, that sense of being watched and paranormal things happening. So I compartmentalize these different things, into boxes. The Sasquatch is over here, the ghosts are over here, shadow figure, I don't know what that is, over there, and, and all that kind of stuff. And it really wasn't until that second book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, where they kind of talk about the hitchhiker effect of people that are on these high strangeness locations like Skinwalker Ranch that have this phenomenon kind of follow you. But that being said, I would love to know your opinion on this kind of trauma disassociation piece, which I've been researching lately. And people who can disassociate, which I did when I was a young girl, seem to tap into something. And that actually connects you no matter where you are as an energy form or as a spirit being, that is with you. And I find that to be the case. Do you find that as well with the experiencers you work with?
The disassociation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although looking back on my life, I don't recall any trauma. But maybe my trauma was coming here as a little girl and not knowing the language. Maybe that was traumatic for me and I didn't realize it. I do think that's one of the reasons that my psychic abilities were strengthened, because I was just trying to figure out what people were saying. And so I learned how to read their energy. So I could figure out what was being said.
Yeah, that's a good point, because when you hyper focus, and whether you have like an alcoholic parent, I mean, my dad, you never knew what dad was going to be walking through that door at the end of the day. So you do learn to read subtleties in people's energy fields when you're young. And I think moving to a new country where you don't speak the language and you are having to read people, and then also, that when you have a near-death experience or something like that and you disassociate. I think those, at least that's in my research, I've known almost every person I talk to has some sort of form of that piece. It's really interesting.
That's a very interesting piece. Like you're trying to just leave the current situation and you go into the other dimensions and then you make friends there. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Let's talk about the episodes that you were on Beyond Skinwalker Ranch in season 1, episode 3, Rocky Mountain Ranch, and season 2, The Landing Site, episode 5. They wanted you to come back because the first show was so good. Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm getting tingly all over again. All right. So there were a few things in the season number 1 show, episode 3. When you talked, when they responded to your voice, oh my gosh, I got goosebumps. And also those prints in the snow.
I know. What is that? So first thing first, that episode was the very first time I had stepped foot back on that property since I was a little girl. And so like behind the scenes kind of thing, they film with you for a whole week and they're getting it down to like 44 minutes an episode or whatever. So you don't know what's going to make the episode and what's not going to make the episode. And I just remember having all this anxiety, like, well, all this happened so many decades ago. Like, what if I get there and I haven't talked to the people that now own the ranch, which purchased it from the family that I was connected to. So they've, lived there for 30 plus years. And I didn't know how they were going to respond to learning the history of their property. So that made me nervous, number 1. Number 2, I didn't know if the place was still active or not active. I didn't know what I'd remember, what I wouldn't remember. And as I pull up to the gate to go onto the property, it's getting dusk. And I just remember panicking, like, I don't want to get up there and it's already dark, because I want to see. And most importantly, like visiting, I was in Laughlin and went to the Blind Frog Ranch, and I was with Dwayne Ollinger and them, and I wanted to feel the energy there as compared to how I felt as a young girl. Because when you experience that feeling of being watched, that eerie, I mean, it was a scary time for me. That feeling intimately, right? I lived with it for so many years. And I knew if I went back to Blind Frog, if I would feel that same kind of energy again, and I did not. It actually felt very good and positive there. Not to say that the Rocky Mountain Ranch is necessarily negative, but it was definitely different. So I wanted to feel that when I went back with Beyond Skinwalker that first time. And thankfully, it was just enough light. I knew the house was in the same place, but it was a little confusing to me because they had added an addition out to both sides and out to the front. So I thought they just leveled the old house that I remember from when I was a kid, but they actually built around it. So the original house is still there. And so when they did that radio with the crystal radio experiment, they put that radio in the old part of the house. And that's where we had the most terrifying night on that ranch with this disembodied electrical voice. So one of the very first things that happened when they purchased this property is they would hear hum sounds and like bangs underground where there's nothing underground, which begs the question, were they tunneling? What are these hum sounds? And what's fascinating to me too is why they're filming. They're out there by the cistern with the current owners of the property. And unfortunately, after they filmed season 1, Greg lost his wife, Chris, who was in that episode. So the second episode is dedicated to her. And I think it's fantastic. She's in that first episode. So we could see Chris in that. But they're out there and you hear that hum sound. And it went on for quite a while and they were able to capture that. So that was really cool because it's identical to what I remember hearing when I was younger. But anytime this hum sound would come up, unusual things would happen around the ranch property. And so one night it was, so the mother's father, who my mom was dating, and their mother, Betty, all the adults are now passed that were there at the time, Jack, Betty, and John, and my mother. They're all 4 passed now. And my mom was dating Jack, and Betty, the boys' mother, was dating John. And John, Jack, and Betty owned the property together. But we were there with the boys celebrating their mother's birthday. And all the adults were hanging out playing board games in the front room. It was really late at night. And my sister and me and the 3 boys are hanging out in the boys' bedroom, and that hum sound came up like, and at that time, all the power in the house goes out. The brightest light I've ever seen is through the window. And it was like brighter than the sun, and we're all freaking out. That's when it sounded like out of every orifice in the house, it was like an electronic sounding voice. And the reason I know what it says all these years later is, let me get it. John Schuessler, here it is. It's in this document right here. And that's the quote. "Attention, we have allowed you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Do not cause us to take action, which you will regret. Your friends will be instructed to remain silent concerning us." And what's fascinating about that, when I still get goosebumps sometimes when I see that, and it's in this APRO report that John Schuessler gave to me, who was one of the founding fathers of MUFON. But APRO investigated the ranch, and I never knew, or my sister or my mother never knew anybody knew anything about the ranch. We thought it was this family secret that we weren't supposed to talk about and nobody knew anything about. So until I joined MUFON in 2012, came in right as a field investigator because I had learned about it on some documentary on a show. I was really into ghost hunting and the ghost hunters and all that stuff. Like, you know what, I'm going to join and see what I could find out about this. And then I picked up the book Hunt for the Skinwalker, started reading that book by Colm Kelleher, PhD, and George Knapp. And I get to a chapter, Other Hotspots, and I start reading about a ranch in Colorado. Nobody knew the location of the ranch or the actual people's names. It was never disclosed before. But I knew when I knew the strange dynamic of the family, my mom, I'm like, that has to be it. And in that book, they mentioned Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who Dr. Leo Sprinkle was a pioneer in hypnotherapy and near-death experiences and past life regression for over 40 years. And he lived in Laramie, Wyoming, which for me was only a 2-hour drive. And he was old school, did the old mail, no technology. So I wrote him an old-fashioned letter explaining who I was, my connection to the ranch. Was this the same location? And it's one of the most cherished things I own. But he wrote a letter back saying, yes, I think I might have sent that to him, I'm not sure. But yes, this is the ranch, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I didn't send that. Confirming that was the location. And ever since then, it's just been an ongoing investigation of what was happening there. And the big question for me has always been, how much is Black access government projects? Because the property sat vacant. It's 60 acres. It sat vacant for over 10 years. In the notes, in Leo's notes, it said it was vacant for 10 to 12 years. And we do know that there were soldiers from Camp Carson on the property. We do know that NORAD and the Air Force Academy, the directive had a head to handle UFOs and Bigfoot. All these notes in Dr. Sprinkle's files about the military knowing about the ranch property, which begs the question, what were they doing out there? And then John, the main guy who purchased the property, he started in San Francisco and was part of the Air Force. And so we wonder about MK Ultra and things like that as connected to that. But as you can imagine, and I know you've experienced the same kind of things, that's one piece of the puzzle. But the other side of it is all these unusual paranormal things that cannot be explained by the military. And what is that? So I feel like both things were going on. And then what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Was the military there because of the activity, and they're trying to research it as well, or were they causing it? And I think through my research anyway, I believe that the activity way predates, even probably back to the time of the Native Americans, the military presence. So I think it's the latter, that the military showed up later,
What did the adults say? Did they hear that robotic voice when they were playing board games?
They did. And everybody was freaking out. And I just remember the adults were trying to figure out, I just remember them because they had these old clunky, like kind of turntable, like they were like big boxes, the old radios and stuff. And I remember them looking and unplugging stuff and trying to figure out what the heck that was. But just recently, I learned about something called plasma ball technology. And there's some videos on YouTube. If you look at plasma ball voices, and you could play a little clip of it, it sounds very similar, like an electronic sounding voice, like what we heard that night. Were they, here's my big thing. If the military was out there doing experiments with lasers or different plasma ball technologies or MK Ultra kind of stuff, why not just purchase the property? It sat vacant for all those years. Why not just purchase it? And then there's the cattle mutilation thing. I mean, we have all these blacked out helicopters happening at the time. If they wanted to do this to cattle, they certainly had the resources to just test cattle. I mean, it just doesn't make any logical sense to me that the military wouldn't just purchase the property. Or was it John Duke, who's part of the Air Force? And it is said that, and I have communications on a limited basis via Facebook with the youngest son. And he, I'm asking questions about John, the main person on the ranch. And very little is known about him, but he did say that oftentimes he would invite like homeless people, vagrants, people from the state hospitals. And we know that through MK Ultra, they use these type of people, right, to do experiments on. And then my half brother at the time is in the state hospital in Pueblo. Is there a connection there? I don't know. It's a possibility. Something I have to look at. Yeah, it's like deep. It goes deep.
Yeah, it's like endless. So do you think your brother was involved in any kind of MK Ultra stuff?
I don't know. It's really interesting because his problem started back in the 60s. They did not have autism, right? It wasn't a known condition. And talking to my aunts and my mother and people who knew Gary as a younger boy, he has since passed too. My brother has passed. But he exhibited a lot of characteristics of a child who is on the autism spectrum. And I have a child as well who is, PDD on the autism spectrum. And so back in those years, they would institutionalize people who were, mentally ill way quicker than they do now. Obviously, they're filling up these state hospitals. So his started in Chicago. And then they labeled him schizophrenic on top of it. So his education is very limited, but looking at his handwriting, his letters, the note he left in the fire, he burnt down 2 of our homes. He burnt down a home we bought in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and he burnt down our home here in Colorado in 1973. He poured gasoline on the outside and torched it. I was at school down the street at my elementary school. But reading the letters that he wrote and left in the fire, I still have it. It's very cryptid sounding. For the lack of education he had, super intelligence off the chart. He did like he was an artist and did these amazing pieces of artwork, but he sounded like he talked about his hall of memory and people he knew on the other side. Like it's really interesting. I'm not saying I don't know, but after the second fire here in Colorado, my mom and dad had to press charges for insurance, and he ended up, serving time at the state hospital in Pueblo. And then you fast forward a couple of years, and then the ranch stuff starts happening. So, and I remember, I'm in elementary school at the time. A lot of trauma, the divorce, the fires, all this, and before the fire, he took an axe to our furniture, walked in, there's an axe so a lot of kind of really traumatic stuff. So I was being pulled out into these small groups in school. And I remember even being taken on a bus once a week and going to some little thing and doing these tests and things like that. I don't know what that was about. I remember it being told to me that I had speech impediments, but I don't ever recall having a speech impediment. So it's like mysterious. I don't know if they were looking at the trauma piece or I was in groups for divorce or what that was, but it's all kind of, I don't know. It's just a strange time for me, And then my sister, she's 6 years older, as soon as she was able to, and she graduated high school, she moved to Gillette, Wyoming. She's like, I'm out of here. So then it was just me and my mom, and the boys lived with us through those years, but then they moved back with their dad. So it's just a really crazy time during the ranch years for sure.
I had a weird dream last night. I don't know if it's related to any of this, but it was the kind of dream that I haven't had in years. I haven't had a dream like this in years. And whatever that dream was, if it was a dream, but in the middle of the night, some person was next to me. And I got scared and I thought it was going to hurt me. So I get up out of the bed and I go to the front door to get out of the house, and he's just following me. He's not hurting me at all. And so I open the front door and there's all these people in my front yard. And they're telling me that they're doing landscaping, but it's like 4 o'clock in the morning or something. And so I want to scream help, but I can't. It's like slow motion. And I'm like, and nothing's coming out. Has that ever
Yeah.
happened to you? Yeah.
Right.
I
Yeah.
haven't had one of those dreams in years. And
Oh,
then I
that's
woke
freaky.
up this morning. I'm like, did Katie Paige send me an attachment right before?
Oh, no.
Anyway,
Oh,
I talked
no.
whatever that man was that was next to me. I had a good talk with him and I told him he can't come back.
Right. That's
Okay.
good. That's empowering. Like to know that you can set boundaries. It took me decades to figure that out.
Me too.
You know, and I don't know if you've had that experience, but as I got older and I started kind of dabbling in all these esoteric kind of things, just curious, learning about crystals and vibrations and sound, all these things that a lot of us dabble in. I'm like, well, first of all, through Dr. Sprinkle's files, I learned that they've been talking about this thing for decades. So all these vibrations and all this stuff, I'm like, they're talking about that in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and we're like reinventing the wheel. But I used to have these reoccurring dreams all the time, and what you just said reminded me of that. The dream I had during those ranch years, it was like I was a little girl and I was walking. It was a thread thinner than a strand of hair, like the thinnest of thread. And in my dream, I was walking around with this thread, and if it broke, I would die. And I just remember being it was like this terrifying dream of don't break the thread or I'm going to die. And I had that reoccurring for many years, that dream. So I don't know. I hope you didn't get an attachment from me at all. Like, oh, wait.
There was another part of the dream that the people in my front yard, they were keeping me so busy that I missed my interview with you. I couldn't do my interview.
Oh, no.
I was so upset. Yeah, so I was glad when I woke up.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay, there's another very interesting aspect to your experience when you were a little girl that carried into season 2 of Beyond Skinwalker. And I believe, yeah.
Right here. Yep. So this was a really cool thing also to get I'll never forget the time. Well, a couple things. When I first read that book and I realized that was investigated, and then to get the report, I was on the phone with my sister, called my mom, like to have these experience that we remember so clearly in a report was just mind-blowing to me. It still blows my mind. But one time on the ranch, it was the weekend, me and my sister, it was a wet, heavy snow, and we decided to go out in front of the ranch house and flip the Frisbee. And we looked down on the ground and it was dry dirt where nothing grew in this perfectly round circle. The investigator in me now, all these years later, goes, well, there's a silo sitting there. Was there something sitting there? No. And then to see it in this here, and in the report, it actually says that the investigators went out there to investigate the circle, which was 75 feet in diameter, and there were drops of blood outside the snowless circle. Like, what is that about? Is that tied to the mutilations that were going on at the time? And then also in the report, there were 2 of these circles on the property. I only experienced the one in front of the ranch house when we were playing Frisbee. But now in season 2 on Beyond Skinwalker, this is where we're shooting the rockets up. And the first season, we shot a little rocket up to kind of poke the hornet's nest. Like, hello, we're here, we're back. And then the radio, that crystal radio experiment, to get back to that really quick, they put it in the old part of the house where the only time they would see shadow of little creatures and stuff was in that original old part of the house, the people that live there now. And the daughter that grew up there, Nicole, she's on the episodes as well. She also has encounters with these shadow beings that I had as a kid, same experiences. So I'm like, whoa, what is that about? But so I'm communicating on, the ham radio guys there, and they're like, okay, we're going to have another person. I'm like, hello, do you remember us? And and I was like, oh, like, yeah. I mean, and what they don't show, here's what they don't show, and it actually really surprised me. This repeated like 3 times, where we had other people do it, nothing. Every time I did it, it would jump. But as this is happening on the CB radio, we're getting transmissions from the Vietnam War. They're talking about the Vietnam War on the radio. And then inside the house, I hear that they're picking up subtle, like almost like clicks, almost like a what do they call it, like SOS or and that Travis Taylor was looking at that. They had never heard that before. And I can't talk about it for season 3. We've already filmed for that. And I can at least say that my sister comes back with me and they repeat that. And I can't tell you what happens because of the non-disclosures, but mind blowing. And it was interesting for my sister because she has not had the hitchhiker things like I have had, which is one of those questions that I wonder about. Like, why does this activity affect certain people certain ways and other people in other ways? Like, I never could figure that out. And through being a MUFON investigator, that you can have a group of people and one person in the group is going to experience something altogether different than the other people in the group. And it's confusing to me why that would be. But my sister was like, I don't want whatever is going on with you to be attached to me, and I understand that. So I kind of had to but when we're like in our 70s and our 80s, we'll be able to say, hey, remember when we did this and we faced it. And so I was really happy that she agreed to go on and do that episode. And I'm excited to see that one when it comes out for season 3. But she did go back with me and we did repeat that. And I can't wait to be able to talk about what happened with that.
Oh, I can't wait to see that. That is a big deal that your sister did that, especially since she's under the radar with all of this. And now all of a sudden she comes up on one of the most popular shows.
I know. And she was nervous because she was a radio broadcaster from coast to coast for a long time. And I don't think she wanted her actual name out there. But then at the very last minute, she's like, all right, go ahead and use my name. So I'm just happy she did that, because as we're filming and we're walking around out there, memories are coming back to her. And we got to spend sister time just walking around the property and, hey, remember this, remember that. We actually, as we're walking, we discovered some hair in the barbed wire really low. And we're like, oh my gosh, maybe this is Bigfoot hair or whatever. It wasn't. They have to anyway. But the other thing on season 1, though, and you kind of mentioned it, were those footprints.
Yeah,
that was that first night back on. It got dark. They're like, tell us about where you had this box encounter, which they haven't even touched on the strange boxes on any of the episodes. But that's why we were walking back there. And we go over the barbed wire, blizzard. I mean, you could see in Paul and Andy's beards all frozen. And I had fallen. I was not prepared for this unexpected blizzard. I mean, we knew we were going to get snow, but not like that. And I had fallen and my jeans were soaking wet. I was freezing. Anyway, we're walking back and all the camera guys are behind me, and out of the snow, and it was snowing so hard that your tracks are filling up with snow almost as quickly as you're walking. Out of nowhere, this is like this blanket of snow, and then these bipedal footprints, I would say 6 to 10 feet like that, and then they disappear, and then they come back, and then they disappear again. And that was the craziest thing I've ever seen. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're catching this with the camera. And of course, like anything, it doesn't do it justice because it's blizzarding so hard you can't really see, but they were very clearly just coming out of nowhere. Like something came up, walked, went under, came up, walked, and went under again.
That was pretty effective. But you saw something running by, and that's why you went to look for the footprints.
Well, technically we were going out there to look to see where I had this box encounter, but why we were headed, because one of the main features on that ranch property is that big silo. Yeah. And that was there when I was a kid. So we were walking and they were actually doing readings. And this is another thing that didn't make the episode. They were doing readings around like the new structure of the house, the old structure of the house, where the cistern is, where the old well is. And then they went out to the silo and did readings. All the old places of the house gave off really high readings. All the new places gave off low readings. So we were just down there like taking readings, and I saw something run by. I could tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a rabbit. It wasn't I don't know what it was. But I saw it clear as day, and then boom, it was gone. And then to have that happen. And then another thing that happened the following day when we're poking the hornet's nest with the little rocket is me and one of the rocket dudes heard like large bird flapping, like a big bird flapping its wings. And we're like, did you hear that? And it's right back there in the tree line where it's reported they had these big cryptid birds sighted there, like phoenixes, those kind of things. And he heard it. I heard it. Nothing. I don't know what that was either. So.
Oh, can we go back to the messages from Vietnam on the radio?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why didn't they include that in the show?
I have no idea. I have no idea. And also, if you go to History Channel, I think it's still on there, but there's like bonus footage that you can see, like short videos. And the other thing that did not make season 1 was we had David Morehouse do the biggest remote view ever on the ranch property in season 1. And they had over 70 remote viewers from around the world. And they, I think, ended up with like, I can't remember, I want to say 7,000 data points. And we literally spent on season 1, 2 hours of going through David Morehouse's remote viewer results on the screen in the garage there. And I went away there going, oh my gosh, either all these 70 remote viewers from around the world got tipped off and they had information. How can they know all this stuff? They got the boxes, they got the Sasquatch, they got the military or police presence, they got, I mean, you name it. They were talking about all the things that happened out there, like that this is like a super highway of interconnectivity and all these things. And it was, the amount of information blew my mind. But thankfully in season 2, they kind of brought him back. And, you know, kind of touched on it a little bit where they had the clusters and stuff. And I hope that if the seasons, if we get lucky enough that they continue, that they bring more of that remote viewing in, because I think it's fascinating what was revealed through that.
Yes, I remember the one drawing of a portal in a portal and hitting a wall.
Right,
You know
right where the rocket went up, and then it, because the other rockets were like going way, like miles off course, and all these really strange behaviors of these rockets. But the big rockets that they launched from the cistern literally went up, and it's like it kind of did this, and then it's like it hit a wall and came right down at the landing site where that big circle on the ground was when we were a kid. And also for season 3, something else bad happened to me at the landing site, and I can't say because of non-disclosures, but it was like it makes me like go, okay. The other thing on season 1 that didn't make it, and I'm not sure I sent you this picture either, but that night I was not prepared for the snowstorm. So I had a vest on, a hoodie, a sweater, a shirt, like I had many layers. Well, the next day I had my daughter come down to Castle Rock. We had a day off of filming. I'm like, let's go to the Columbia store and buy like long johns and, you know, warmer things. So we spent the day shopping at the outlet stores in Castle Rock. Then we go to Red Robin for lunch, and we're just sitting there having lunch, and my back started bothering me. We go back up to my hotel room, and I look, and it looks like there's 3 fingers, and it's this big handprint on my shoulder, and it's all blistered. I'll send you the picture so you can see it. But it was hot to the touch. We videotaped it, and I showed the crew the next day. I'm like, look, you know, here, and they videoed everything, so they have it all documented, but they don't know if it's a radiation burn or I was attacked by something. I didn't lean up against anything. I don't know how that got there because it was through many layers of clothing.
Yeah, you didn't even feel it, right? You didn't
No, I didn't. Not until the next. I was like, what is this? But it looks like this on my shoulder. Like maybe something was just trying to help me. I maybe shouldn't assume that it's negative or bad. Maybe they were like, oh, she's falling. I don't know.
Well, that robotic sound that gave you that message, pretty much like don't tell anybody, or it was it sounded like it might hurt you. Is the message kind of sounded like that, didn't it? Let me put this message up again. Do you think those are humans telling you that message, or do you think those are ETs?
Well, here's the interesting thing. And, you know, in the briefing documents, they talk about the adults, and there were several. And here's the other thing I'd like to say for your listeners. All this activity did not just happen on this one ranch property. This affected the whole area of Elbert County. I think my Excel spreadsheet's up to 250 some people. And it's still going on to this day. So it's from Franktown to Elizabeth, to Kiowa, to Simla, to Rama. And I've through the years, I've done a lot of interviews with these other people who have experienced things, right? And many articles about mutilations back in the time. The Colorado Bureau of Investigations was involved. Like I said, NORAD directive had directives to handle these kind of things. We had no-fly zones put over the counties. We had the sheriff, George Yarnell. If you watch the movie A Strange Harvest, Linda Moulton Howe's movie from, I think, 80, 81, she talks about a lot of these from the late 70s. And George Yarnell is in that movie. And also Bill Waugh, who was the undersheriff, he encountered the box and the strange lights. So a lot of adults experience these things, but there were two types of ETs that were said to be seen on this ranch, along with 9 landed discs out where that landing circle is, where that circle is. 9 discs landed right out in front of the ranch house. One of them were what I call, I was on a show with Paul Giamatti, which is a whole funny story because I didn't know who Paul Giamatti was. I felt horrible. He walks in to the studio with this cool mind control shirt on. I'm like, cool shirt. I'm like, you look kind of familiar. And he goes, yeah, I've been in a few movies. I'm like, oh, okay. And I started talking to this other person, didn't even know. I have this 2-hour, actually over 2-hour and 20-minute interview with Paul Giamatti and whoever the other guy is. And anyway, so I get home up here and I do a Google search on Paul Giamatti and I see the lists of movies. I'm like, oh, I didn't know who that was. And I'm glad I didn't know because I think I would have been nervous had I known. But I didn't know. So thank you for my ignorance. But anyway, so he labeled these guys the Tubi guys. So there were 2 types, the Tubi guys and then the Nordics. So in the Tubi guys had a sketch in Dr. Leo's files. And so this guy, the long with the skinny arms. Now the doodle, the face in the window, this was one of the coolest things that ever happened to me. At the time, I was the guest speaker coordinator for Colorado MUFON. And that little picture in the bottom, I guess it's my left-hand corner with like tubes in his neck. Those 2 go together. So this gentleman by the name of Sean Bartok wrote a book called Flashbacks about all these things that he had happened to him on his property. Come to find out, after getting to know him, after he came to speak with us, his property was only 14 miles away from the ranch property. And I'm sitting there watching his presentation, and that face in the window doodle comes up along with that one in the corner with the heavy brow and the wrinkles. And he said those tubes in the neck actually come out like Tubi guy. And I'm like, they look awful similar. The shape of the eyes, the heavy brow, the wrinkles, the tubes. And we didn't know each other. So how does that happen? And what is that? Because this is an unusual type of ET that you don't see very often. It's not like, your average typical grays or whatever. So one day I'm at the grocery store and there was a Popular Mechanics issue as I'm waiting to check out with my groceries. And it was all about AI. And it kind of hit me, oh my gosh, they have these Tubi things, right? Or maybe these guys are some sort of AI hybrid kind of creature. I don't know. But the other kind that were there were these Nordic, the blonde, blue-eyed types. And in the documents, in the reports, it said they were in conflict with one another. And these boxes that were seen out there by several adults, and I saw it in the daytime. My sister remembered having experience with these unusual boxes that made this like bee sound. They state in the document that those boxes are lethal. And they showed how lethal they were by having a Sasquatch walk up to it and it dropped it to its knees in the report. I didn't witness that. I didn't witness any of these ET beings, but that's what's in the report. And that they had communications with these ETs and they were just in conflict with one another. And like, we were just like, don't mind us. We won't mind you. But I can tell you something about that warning. My mom and Jack took that warning very seriously and said, don't you talk about what's going on out there to anybody. So my sister and I created our own little secret language that we would talk to each other about, kind of like Pig Latin, where the E we would, I would go and we would talk that way in secret. And we didn't talk about it for years and years and years and years. So
this, I'm going to put this back up. This doodle face in the window. Are you saying you saw that in the...
And I didn't see any of these, but in that, the drawing with the shield and the skinny arms and the legs, the big one, that drawing there, that was in Dr. Leo Sprinkle's files from the ranch, along with the drawing of the white fuzzy or Sasquatch creature that was seen there on multiple occasions. And then the other two are from that other gentleman that wrote a book, and they look very similar. See, we didn't know each other, and they look at that, the wrinkles, the eye shape, the little mouth, the tubes, the head shape. It's just really interesting.
Up with the tubes. So you had a lot of Bigfoot activity. First of all, it's not really called Rocky Mountain Ranch, is it? And we don't know where it is, correct?
No, we do know where it is. It was known in folklore in the APRA reports as Clearview Ranch, because they didn't want the town known. They didn't want the attention. They didn't want the sheriff and the undersheriff wanted, their credibility to stay intact. They didn't want swarms of people going out there to the town. But Big Mouth Katie has come out, and I'm like, I know, it's in Elbert County, Colorado. And like I said, it wasn't just at the ranch. There's actually mutilation still occurring to this day. I just interviewed, and we can get into it a little bit later, but interviewed an elk hunter who had an experience with something very unusual just recently. So things are still going on out there, but it's this whole area of Elbert County, which in the state of Colorado is really, the Palmer Divide runs right in there. And the Palmer Divide is it's kind of very similar to the Archuleta Mesa in New Mexico. So the area is highly magnetic. There's aquifers underground, which David Pilates talks about in his Missing 411 UFO Connections case. So I think there's something to the geologic makeup of these areas, the magnetism of these areas, and then you throw water in the mix, and it's like this magical recipe, I feel, with a lot of these locations around the world,
Yeah. Katie, you investigate cattle mutilations too?
I avoided it for a long time because it's such a controversial topic, not like the rest of it isn't. That's funny. But I kind of thought, you know what? We have the experts that do that. Chuck Zukowski, Christopher O'Brien, Linda Moulton Howe. They're the experts. Let them do it. But I haven't been able to avoid it because it's still going on to this day. Not to the extent it was back then. Back then we had, people were arming themselves. They were afraid they were going to go to humans next. Of course, Snippy the horse in 1967 out there at the San Luis Valley. I just recently interviewed a gentleman who was one of the first 4 people to see Snippy the horse on the ground. And that's going to be an exciting interview to get out there. Along with Kerry King and the King family. He was there for that. But they were mutilating horse, sheep, dog, even. I found articles about mutilated dogs, smaller animals. And through the research I've done just recently, I think there's an elk connection as well.
Elk.
Yeah. ETs and elk. There's a famous case called the Carl Higdon case in 1974. And Carl Higdon was in Rawlins, Wyoming. He was in Medicine Bow National Forest, which actually, if you watch David Pilates' Missing 411, he talks about a couple cases out there in Medicine Bow. And he was out there hunting elk and encountered Osso One, who basically shot at the elk, and the bullet hits like this invisible wall. And there was a box in this encounter as well. And this is the year before the ranch stuff. Bullet falls to the ground. He's floated these food pills by this extraterrestrial. Is like, are you hungry? Well, if you're hungry, here, we'll fix that. Take one of these pills, which he did. It's this long story. It's a really cool case. If you haven't heard it, you should look it up. But he has physical things. He was taken to the hospital. They tested his blood. He has the hospital records. Dr. Leo Sprinkle's archives has all the original photos and information about this case, but his pickup truck was seen in a different area or was taken to a different area in this like mud bog. They had to get it out. His wife, they went searching for him. And when they found him, he was all, disoriented and, oh my gosh, they took my elk. But he claims they actually took him to their planet and everything. It's a really interesting case. But this happened just the year before. And there's some commonalities between what was going on at the ranch and the Carl Higdon case in Wyoming. So go figure. I don't know. I don't know what's up with these boxes. That's kind of what I'm interested in lately. I'm trying to gather up. If anybody out there has any box information, let me know. Because
I've talked with an experiencer who's seen a box.
Oh, really?
So we're talking about a box on the ground, not necessarily floating. A box
Okay.
on the ground. No,
Yeah,
I'm
this one
asking
was
you.
seen on the. Well,
Yeah.
I saw it floating, but they were also seen
Oh,
on
they
the
float
ground.
too.
So
Okay.
both.
Yes. Yes, I have talked with, I think, 2 experiencers that have seen something like
Really?
that. I don't remember where they were. I
Do you
have to
know
go
if they
through my
made
records.
any? Did the boxes make any noise?
I don't remember, Katie. I have to go through my records and see if I
That'd
can
be
find that tape.
interesting. Yeah.
Okay, I'll see. All right. This went by so fast.
I
We
know.
didn't even talk about everything that we wanted to talk about. But you have started a new research organization. If you could just talk about that just for a little bit, please.
Yeah. Rocky Mountain Ranch. Rocky Mountain Research with Katie Paige. And here's how that came about. I was doing some podcasting and I thought about doing a new show. And I'm very happy to be a co-host on UAP Studies podcast with Jason Gilmount and Dr. Michael. But here's Rocky Mountain Ranch. Did my coffee mug. So fun. But I thought I would do something new.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're a graphic artist, correct?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So you did all that graphic work. It looks good.
I had
I
fun
bet that was
doing
fun.
the logo.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And doing the products is kind of fun too. But I just designed a hoodie and I did a To Be Guy t-shirt, which you can find at RockyMountainRanchResearch.org. And all of that stuff, all the proceeds to that helps me get equipment. Because one of the things my concept was basically to kind of take everybody with me as I investigate. So when I go, like I'm putting together the interview with Joe Spencer, one of the guys from Snippy the Horse, like I go on location and I'm doing, I'm trying to redo what they're doing on Skinwalker Ranch, kind of testing it for myself, or visiting Mount Wilson Ranch, for example, and seeing the caves and conducting interviews with things. I just thought, well, I want to take everybody along with me as I do this and share the information that I'm finding out. How can I do that? Oh, I know, I can do YouTube videos. So I'm kind of slow going because I'm kind of learning. Like my first episode, I had to pull off because we didn't have the right equipment and the wind's blowing and I'm trying to learn how to lower it. It still sounds awful. Like we're in a cave. So, we're learning and we're trying to acquire the right equipment so things sound good and look good and all that stuff. But it's basically so I could just take everybody along with me as I investigate to try and find answers. Because I really truly feel that's how we are going to find the answers, by working together and communicating together.
Yeah. Well, tell us the name of your YouTube channel and also where we can find you. If anyone's seen a box, contact me or Katie, please.
Yes, please. 2 ways you can find me: katiepage.net or katiepage.org, and also RockyMountainRanchResearch.org. You can find me there, and there's links to contact me at both of those locations.
Okay. Well, this was wonderful. I'd love to have you back so we can talk about other things and season 3. I'm very excited about that. Do you know when it's coming out or you don't know?
I think it's November or December is the rumor, but I don't know until the rest of y'all know. And what's really funny is I don't know what makes the episode until I watch it along with all of you guys. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. So it's really interesting for me, like things that I think will make the episodes that I'm like, oh, I can't believe don't. And the reason they don't is because they all have to kind of tie into Skinwalker Ranch, right? They're kind of following this rhythm, I guess, where everything sort of ties together. So if things kind of fall outside of that, it doesn't necessarily make it in there. But I hope eventually they get it in, because I think it's important information. And I'm really thankful to that show that they brought the attention to these other locations. It's not just the Skinwalker Ranch. It's multiple locations across the country and even the world that have these similar types of activity. And I think that's important that people realize that.
That there's many places like this. But the researchers on Beyond Skinwalker are really enamored with your Rocky Mountain Ranch. The looks on their faces, they look shocked with some of the data that they're collecting. All right, Katie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sev.
Everybody, thank you for spending your time with us. We're very grateful. Bye.